Hi there. Thanks for joining us today on our lunch bunch topic of FMLA and PLO. My name is Lori Grenia. I'm the president and owner here at HR Answers, and I'm happy to share this information with you today. Our HR Answers has been in business for, oh gosh, over 40 years now, so since 1985. We provide services to public sector, private sector, and nonprofit organizations in all different industries. Our team is a highly experienced group of professionals, all with over 20 years of experience working in HR or training related HR topics, related to management coaching. So anything that will help your organization be successful in mitigating risk associated with personnel management. So my personal background, I started in public sector, have been doing HR for about 25 years. Joined HR Answers about 10 years ago as a consultant, and 4 years ago, uh, I had the opportunity to keep a really great thing going. So bought the company from its founder, Judy Clark. And I am absolutely proud of our team and proud of the information we can share with you. So let's dive into today's topic. Uh, Again, our goal today is really to just look at the specific differences between the Family Medical Leave Act that's at the federal level and paid leave Oregon insurance. And I just want to cover this in plain language. We're just trying to get some assistive tools to you so that you can think through when do these things overlap with each other, what's unique about each of them, and then the ever interesting land of intermittent versus continuous leaves. Continuous almost kind of feels like set it or forget it, where intermittent feels like it's constantly on top of us to be looking at different obligations and how those things are working. It's true. It is forever on top of you, but there is some set it and forget it. It's just the forget it is less amount of time. So let's talk about these individually. Again, family and medical leave, frequently called the FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act. This is a federal law. It's going to apply to any organization with 50 or more employees, and then employees become eligible if there are 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. That radius seems to be an important little piece that most organizations didn't worry about too much pre-pandemic. But with the onset of many people working remotely, it becomes incumbent on organizations to think through, are remote employees covered? So if the majority of your organization is sitting maybe in Medford, Oregon, and you have one employee that works remotely from Texas, that one employee, strictly by the law, is not covered because there aren't 75 employees within or 50 employees within that 75-mile radius. However, the organization always has the opportunity to be more generous than the law. Again, remember, laws set the floor, not the ceiling. They set the minimum of what we have to do, and we can certainly reach beyond that. Paid leave Oregon, again, I think we're getting there. It's becoming more normalized than what it was when it first started. So no big surprise that that was a big shift in concept and idea. Probably some of the largest shift was that organizations were not responsible for making the decisions, but they are responsible for understanding where in that process an employee might be. So not a whole lot different than workers' comp, where you were previously looking at an insurance provider to evaluate a claim and determine the duration of time that somebody might be out, and also determine their stability for return. Paid leave Oregon is much like that. So whether you're using the state as your administrator or you have contracted with a third party administrator, it is something you are mandated to do. And all of the decision making sits elsewhere, but for when that person is returning at the end of a leave period, and then there's protections that are in place for them for their job. So family medical leave and paid leave Oregon, of course, do have overlaps within them. And so the first thing to know is that the FMLA, that federal act, is really, it's unpaid leave unless the organization has made the discretionary choice about use of paid time off. And then in paid leave Oregon, not only do we have the job protection, we have protected time off, there's also partial wage or pay replacement available for that. It is a state program. They own the rules, they own the process, like I just mentioned. If you've decided to go with an approved third party administrator, of course, they are going to have part of that process, but it's all governed by the state. So these are just some basic definitions associated with that. Moving on from there, it's important before we dive into, where these things overlap and where they're different to understand the terminology of serious health condition. So FMLA defines a serious health condition as being inpatient care or continuing treatment by a provider. So when we think about inpatient care, we think about hospitalization. Okay, this doesn't mean that somebody's gone to the emergency room and had to stay in the emergency room for hours because of staffing issues. Okay, this means admittance to a hospital. That's the way to think about it. And then secondary to that is PLO, Paid Leave Oregon, which has a very broad definition of a significant condition involving inpatient care. So that's where we get that hospital admittance piece, incapacity, multiple treatments, ongoing care, death risk, or pregnancy related disability. So, in effect, anything that is covered under the FMLA definition is also covered under Oregon's broader definition. But that's not a two-way street. There are some broad components here under the Oregon definition that would not be covered by FMLA necessarily. So a very specific analysis of the serious health condition does need to be applied using these separate definitions. So where in the world do these things overlap? It's really only on 4 topics. Okay, and then even within those, there's a little bit of squishy, but we're going to talk about all that. So the very first one that is covered under both is bonding with a new child. Okay, so this is birth, adoption, or foster placement is both covered under FMLA and PLO. Now, you'll note here on the chart that I have in front of you next to PLO, and this should have bright shining stars flashing at us that says if the employee applies. Okay, so there's absolutely nothing that an organization can do to compel or force an employee to file a paid leave Oregon insurance claim. Okay, so when an employee says, no, you as the organization need to go through your regular process associated with FMLA and PLO, essentially notifying them within 5 days of your knowledge that they may be eligible for these things. It is up to the employee to file for paid leave Oregon insurance. And I know what's going through your mind right now is that one person that you've had that hasn't filed for it and they really needed to because it would have been so supportive, but they didn't, and you continued walking down that path. Ultimately, they used up all of their FMLA. There was no qualifying under anything else. And had they applied for PLO, they'd still be working for you, but they chose not to. And ultimately, we ended up in a medical separation. Okay, here's the deal. It is our job to support people's success. We can't force it. Okay, so employees have to file for PLO. That's their choice, their action. And when they do, and it's bonding the child, we have got a concurrent or an overlapping instance where FMLA and PLO apply at the same time. Okay, the next one is the employee's own serious health condition. And essentially, a serious health condition is measured by those definitions, and that in meeting those, they can't do the essential functions of their job. Okay. And again, that would qualify under both FMLA and PLO as long as the person applies for PLO. So then care for a family member. with a serious health condition, and we're going to cover the squishiness here too. This eligible under both. But the issue with this one, and the reason it gets squishy, is the definition of family members is different between FMLA and PLO. FMLA is more narrow. PLO is significantly broader. I have slides specifically for this, so we'll talk about that there. Pregnancy and parental care, your own conditions or appointments. These are covered under both. Okay, so under FMLA, it usually is covered under an employee's own serious health conditions. Okay, that's where we typically see that playing out. Secondary to that is then PLO. Sometimes, or most likely, this is going to be covered under medical leaves. Okay, the need for ongoing treatment, those types of things. Okay, now the one thing I'm going to remind you about here, and some of you are going to think, well, this is just crazy that she has to say this. It's not crazy. It is just where we're at. So remember that pregnancy and prenatal care are not necessarily only applicable to those who look like they are a female. We have any number of people working in our workplaces that have gone through gender reassignment processes. And even if somebody appears to be a male and comes to you with a need for pregnancy and prenatal care, all we do is get medical certification, indeed, that the employee is pregnant, and we continue forward. No issues. Okay. Now, that might spawn a whole bunch of other communication that you want to talk over with the transgendered employee. Okay. But gone are the days where we can make an assumption that the person coming to us is or isn't because of how we see them. Okay. So just be really clear on this. Absolutely. Let's walk through the documentation that we need. I will tell you, at one point in time, I was the person who's like, if somebody comes and tells me they're pregnant, chances are I can see it. I don't need to get medical certification. This is one of those times where it makes sense, just get med cert on everything. Okay. And that is one of the first steps in the process that you're going to go through, right? As soon as we know or should have known, we are on a 5-day clock to get a person the documentation associated with the processes and programs, FMLA, OFLA, PLO, sick leave, that would assist them through whatever needs they may have during when leave becomes part of that need. So just make sure we stay on board with not making assumptions because of how a person appears to us. Just walk the process. Okay, so this is really the only 4 places where FMLA and PLO overlap. But the big question mark on the overlap is going to be if the employee applies for paid leave Oregon insurance. And some employees choose to be strategic about it. They want 12 weeks under FMLA, and they want a separate 12 weeks under paid leave Oregon insurance. That's their call. They get to make that choice. Okay. However, if they apply, they have made the choice and they run concurrently. So the places where they may qualify for one or the other. So again, this means it's not going to be both of them ever, regardless of their application or not. And the first one is military caregiver leave. FMLA provides leave for covered service members with serious injury or illness. Okay. PLO, paid leave Oregon, does not have that category. Then qualifying exigency. So this is the needs of related family members to, or if your employee is related to a military member during deployment under FMLA, there are certain needs that are covered, and they're called qualifying exigency, that would meet there. Under PLO, no, there isn't something. Now, always remember that when we're dealing with military injuries or we're dealing with a notice of deployment, this can lead to mental health issues for your employee or for the service member. Those would be covered under paid leave Oregon. Okay. So it's possible that the military experience or actions or deployment that's going on is actually causing a mental health issue, and the mental health issue is the qualifying reason. Okay, so just be aware that sometimes how things are presented to us are not actually the detail of the qualification that we're dealing with. So then the last one here is safe leave. This is domestic violence, harassment, sexual assault, or stalking related needs. Okay, so this could be anything from court to counseling, any number of those things. Those are not covered under the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. However, they are covered under Paid Leave Oregon Safe Leave. And this is where I also say, remember that under Paid Leave Oregon, there's two different categories. And these categories look an awful lot like what Oregon sick leave has in them, which are planned instances and unplanned instances. Both are claim worthy. Okay. Planned instances are those that would allow a person to file a claim up to 30 days in advance of the need for leave. And our hope is that employees are, in some circumstances, planning for an absence, which would allow them to provide notice to the employer, which then gives the employer the opportunity to plan for coverage while that person's out. However, as we all know, not all qualifying instances are given to us with notice. Pregnancy is one that typically does come with some amount of notice. Okay, car accident where injury occurs not planned. Okay, something like a surgery might be pre-planned, but is not always pre-planned. And this is another place that I like to say, just a little note. When we're talking about planned surgeries, many times throughout my career as a consultant, have I had employers give me a little call to say, hey, we don't think that this is qualifying because it's discretionary. It's not a life-saving type thing. Maybe somebody is choosing to have some plastic surgery, or they're choosing to have a weight loss surgery of some kind. And the employer sees that as discretionary, so therefore not qualifying. That is not true. Okay. Employees get to make their choice about the medical treatments and processes or procedures that they're going to go through. If those lead to inpatient or serious health condition definitions, they are covered. They are absolutely covered. And I'm sure there are many, many, many more of them than the two that I just mentioned, but those are the two most commonly that come up for us as consultants. So just a word to the wise there. Again, we hope they're planning those with their employer in mind and trying to balance how coverage might work, so on and so forth, but they don't have to. They get to say, I'm going to do this, and it is the employer's responsibility to follow up with the supporting documentation and plans for that coverage. So there are a few things I want to note that are covered elsewhere that are not FMLA covered, that are not PLO covered. Bereavement is one of them. Bereavement is something in Oregon that sits under the Oregon Family Leave Act. And for those of you who deal with Oregon predominantly, you're most likely aware of the fact that when the Paid Leave Oregon insurance first came out, there was a lot of duplication between what was in OFLA, Oregon Family Leave Act, and PLO. And since implementation and getting through that first transitional year and a few months, there has been a significant remodeling to Oregon Family Leave Act to remove the redundancy. And what that essentially means is now Paid Leave Oregon Insurance and Oregon Family Leave Act do not run concurrently. They are an end-to-end practice. So you don't have to worry about concurrency on those. The other one that's covered elsewhere is a short-term illness. So sick leave. Sick leave is something that every single employee in the state of Oregon is covered by. Everybody gets leave. The number of employees only dictates whether that leave is paid or not. So if you're in the Portland area, it's 6 or more employees, it is paid leave. If you're outside of Portland, it's 10 or more employees where it is paid leave. So again, if you're under those thresholds, you still have to provide the leave. You just don't have to pay it. So everyone's eligible for sick leave. And then also associated with short-term illness might be OFLA, again, back to that Oregon Family Leave Act, where we're talking about a child of the employee, maybe has a sore throat or has a fever. If that hits the 3 consecutive shifts, or that your employee would be absent, it is a qualifying instance under OFLA. Okay, so the workers' comp time loss, I think most of us know this already, but that one is covered under your workers' compensation insurance and is going to function a whole lot like paid leave Oregon, where again, somebody else is making all of the determinations which are incumbent upon the employee's application for benefits. Okay, and then the last one, caring for a child for general school closures or childcare issues. So there's a bunch of criteria about what actually constitutes an emergency that hits those school closures or childcare issues, but that would also qualify under sick leave or OFLA. Now, a couple legislative sessions ago, the Bureau of Labor and Industries was charged with looking at the overlap amongst all of the leaves that are in Oregon law. I myself have not done a bunch of digging into where they at with that kind of review, but I do know that they were also looking at increased staffing for the division, the compliance division. And so I'm sure it's all tied up with those things. So more to come as that becomes more apparent to all of us. So the next thing to remember is that family members, so back in the serious health condition for a family member discussion, family members are different depending on which of these laws you're looking at. Yes. So under FMLA, there really are 4 primary categories that are covered here: spouse, child, parent, and next of kin. And they are simply put that specific. Okay, spouse is going to be your husband or wife, but very specifically important is that DOL, the Department of Labor, who regulates the FMLA family or FMLA period, has a very specific way in which they look at husband or wife that differs from Oregon. Okay. Husband or wife is defined or recognized under what's called the place of celebration rule. And place of celebration means where was the marriage actually performed? Okay. Where was the legal process of marriage performed? And if that happened in a state where same-sex marriages or domestic partnerships or any of those types of things are recognized, then it does count as a spouse. However, if it happened to be a ceremony, not a legal process, but a ceremony in a state where same-sex marriage is not recognized, then a same-sex partner would not be considered a spouse under the FMLA. So this is one of those places where if your organization is living by the letter of the law, your organization also needs a process that digs down into what was the place of celebration, and does that state recognize the partnership being characterized as a spousal need meet the intent of the law? Now, my personal preference is to do the easy button here, which is for the organization to be more generous in its application of the term spouse. And you can do that. Again, the law sets the minimum that you have to look at. I personally don't want to have a dog in the fight about how each state looks at spouses or their definition of spouses. Oregon's law has a much more generous way of looking at that, which is because in our state, all forms of marriage between humans is acceptable, other than multiple marriages. So ultimately, you can adopt the more generous definition and therefore not have to go through collecting documentation about where was the legal process undertaken that leads you to claiming the spousal support. Okay, in these processes. So I know that was a lot of information, but this is one of those things. And actually, place of celebration rule was actually determined in 2015. So while, yeah, I know that was 11 years ago, it's relatively new from the perspective that it's something that you can actually grab a hold of and apply if your organization is being more stringent or using the baseline definition under FMLA. So child is a biological child, an adopted child, foster, step, legal ward. So again, some kind of process has been gone through to give you guardianship or give your employee guardianship over this child, or a child from whom the employee stood in loco parentis. And in loco parentis is bolded here because that actually has legal terminology associated with it. There is criteria to determine if in loco parentis is met. So this is where I'm going to tell you, go to Google and ask it, in the United States, what is the criteria behind in loco parentis? And you'll get the spiel for what it is when doing that. So generally speaking, this is going to be somebody who's under the age of 18 or maybe 18 or over, but incapable of self-care because of a disability. Okay. So child, again, pretty narrow definition. I will tell you, Oregon's going to expand on this. Parent, this is the employee's parent, okay? Not their spouse's parent, and this is where confusion starts to happen. This is the parent of your employee, but that can be a biological, adoptive, step, foster parent, anyone who stood in loco parentis to the employee when they were a child. Okay. And then next of kin. And this is specifically for military caregiver leave. If they are the next of kin to a military person who has a serious injury or illness, then, or essentially they are the nearest blood relative. And again, if you want to get picky about this, then you're going to need to ask for more information for your files. And you don't get to pick and choose who you ask more information of. You ask this information every time the question comes up, or you never ask it when this question comes up. That is consistency, and that will rule the day in making sure that you can defend against discriminatory practices of HR. Okay, so then under PLO, spouse or domestic partner. And again, you have to remember we're following Oregon law here, which allows for same-sex marriages and domestic partnership. Those are all legal processes that can be gone through in Oregon, which means they are all going to be covered. Child, again, we still have biological, adopted, step, foster, but we also add here a spouse's domestic partner's children. So this is not just the biological, adopted, foster, or step children of your employee. This is also their spouse's children, which may indeed be not genetically adopted by the parent, by the employee that you have. Okay. So the child's spouse or domestic partner. So the family tree is really big under PLO. All the branches are pretty much covered here. Okay. Parent, biological, adopted, step, foster, and legal. The spouses or domestic partners' parents, parents-in-law, in other words, are covered. Siblings, your employee's brother, their sister, their step siblings, the step siblings' spouses, and domestic partners. So if my brother's partner's parents are not doing well, that's covered. Sibling and step siblings, spouses, and domestic partners. And here's where we go: grandparents, spouses, and or domestic of those of domestic partners, grandchildren, spouses or domestic partners, and any person your employee is connected to, like a family member. Okay. And like a family member is really, really broad. Okay. Really broad. And if a person comes to you with a like a family member request for paid leave Oregon, remember that claim you don't have to determine if that meets a like a family member. That's going to the insurer, whether it be the state or a third party, to regulate against the state law in the definition behind what like a family member means. And let's be frank here, if somebody goes to the trouble to fill out the documentation that is required to identify like a family member, chances are that person's meaningful to them. And if they get denied coverage, they're going to have a hard time getting stuff done at work. Chances are that in and of itself may cause some mental health distress, which is going to get them qualification for a different reason. Okay, so the sameness here is in spouse, as long as place of celebration is being utilized under FMLA, child of the employee, there's your overlap, and parent of the employee. But under paid leave Oregon, it's significantly more expansive. So really, between qualifying instances and the definition of family, there are actually pretty few places where concurrent use of FMLA and paid leave Oregon might happen. Okay. There used to be significantly more alignment between the two of these. So it may feel like this is pretty significant change. And it is. It is. Paid leave Oregon was intended to be extremely generous in ensuring not only some kind of wage replacement, but also job return to employment guarantees for individuals going through difficult times. Okay. Now, I myself like to think of at least the adding a family member as not being necessarily a difficult time, usually a celebratory time. But most of the other things on these qualifying lists of reasons why somebody might utilize either of these provisions are things I really would like to not experience ever. And I would certainly not like the other people to have to experience these things too. So just remember where somebody might be sitting when approaching these things. And if we're truly being supportive of our employees' success in their current and future employment endeavors, treat these with kid gloves. Okay? These are not easy situations. So things that are unique to FMLA, military specific leave, qualifying exigency, so deployment related needs, and military caregiver. Okay. Federal employer coverage. FEMLA applies to the employer if they're covered. It's not a universal program the way PLO is built. Okay, so FEMLA only applies to those who have 50 or more employees and then employees 50 or more within a 75-mile radius. Okay, PLO is available to literally anyone who's employed, not actively on unemployment insurance or workers' comp. Okay. So it really, PLO is intended to be a universal program. So employer, the big difference here between FEMLA and PLO is also that FEMLA is an employer run designation model, meaning you have to assess all the documentation to determine qualification and designate that qualification and track all the process. Also in FEMLA, there is a fixed definition associated with what FEMLA is, what serious health condition is. And the family members are a narrowed scope as well. Again, just a reminder, you can always be more beneficial than what the law would lay out. So unique to PLO is this is a state wage replacement program. It is handled through an insurance process. So the state or a third party administrator is going to approve and deny claims and benefits, and the employee works directly through the portal of either your insurer or the state to apply for and track their own instance. You as an organization should also be accessing accessing the information that is provided by your insurance portal or through the state on Francis to see where are we at with this employee? How much leave have they used? Are we still on track for them coming back? We also expect that you're going to be communicating with an employee at least near a return date on a continuous leave to ensure that things haven't changed. So safe leave is defined as its own qualifying lane under PLO, so that is unique to that. And then program specific pay and leave logistics are things that you do still have to coordinate under PLO. Okay, essentially, the law and the rules say that employees have to be given the option to use other accrued leaves to augment the benefit that they're getting. And when they choose to use that, the employer gets to identify in what order those leaves are going to be used. That essentially should be predetermined in a policy and then universally handled the same way for every employee. And I tend to be a fan of that we use sick leave and then we use vacation. If you're a PTO, you've only got one bucket, so it doesn't matter. If you happen to be in government, then I would say sick leave is the first thing we apply. Compensatory time is the second thing we apply. Again, for those of you who are playing along, comp time is something that only government employers can utilize in lieu of overtime. And then ultimately your vacation pay. So for private industry, if you have separate buckets, again, I would say it's sick leave and then vacation. If you're in government, I would say sick leave, compensatory time, and then vacation. Again, if you've got a PTO where all leaves are in one bucket, pretty easy. You don't have to make the determination of the use of leaves. So next up is continuous leave tracking. How do we make this easy? You have to do all the steps. So a spreadsheet. Some of you might be using human resource information systems that are specifically designed, or you've purchased the specific module for tracking of these leaves. And that will give you all the bells and whistles that you typically need. If you are looking for this type of a system, please reach out to me. We're going to go over my contact information one more time at the end. We've got a couple referrals we'd be happy to give you. But first and foremost, confirm eligibility and designated in writing. Now that's going to be for FMLA only. Okay. PLO, the way you're going to confirm eligibility is you're going to look into the system of record, whether that's your third party insurer or that's Francis Online for the state, to see that it has been approved. Okay. And you are still going to tell the employee, we have been made aware of the fact that you have filed for paid leave Oregon. It has been approved, and we anticipate your return on X and such a date, okay, which is accessible to you. You still need to do that. Even though you're not the decision maker, you need to make sure the employee is aware of the circumstances of their leave. Again, my preference is that you are asking employees to share that information with you. Okay? But if you haven't done that in a policy, you can't require it of them. Only if you give them notice that they are required to let you know, can you then hold them accountable for giving you that information. Okay. You need to make sure that you are clear in your records about the start date, the expected end date, and the return to work date. And the return to work should be the first working day following the end of their leave. Okay. Unless you negotiate something otherwise. You need to track leave against the employee's normal work schedule, hours and days. If they're a part-time employee, they get part-time hours for 12 weeks under FMLA, up to 12 weeks. Okay, and PLO is going to be the same thing. But again, somebody else is tracking all those hours. You should be looking into the system to confirm that you're all on the same page about the hours that have been utilized. Okay. Use consistent timekeeping codes. Okay. If you don't have a payroll code for paid leave Oregon as unpaid time, you need that because you too want to make sure that you have systems that are tracking that information. You should be reconciling this weekly or with each payroll. Okay. And if there are any changes, by tracking it at least by every payroll, you're catching it early. You're seeing what's going on. Okay. You need to log any required notices or certification status dates into the file for medical issues. Okay, this is what we usually call the health and benefits file. Does not go into the personnel file. Please do not put information about somebody's FMLA, OFLA, sick leave, paid leave Oregon into their personnel file. This is a separate file accessible by very few individuals in your organization. Okay. You should put on your agenda, and this is why we want to know when people are coming back. What is that mid-leave or pre-return check-in? When are we checking with them to make sure we're still on track for their return? Okay. And that may be a shared responsibility between human resources and the supervisor. Okay. And then ultimately, when the leave is over, we need a final letter saying, thank you so much for coming back. This is the leave totals as they still sit, because sometimes people are only gone for a few weeks, not for all 12, what their return to work notes are. And I'm just going to put a little plug here. If somebody has actually been gone for a full 12 weeks, please, please, please make sure that that supervisor is keeping notes about what's changed during the time that they've been gone, so that when they come back, we can do a little bit of mini onboarding with that person, new projects that we've taken in, processes that have shifted, maybe new people that have been hired that are in their work team or in their work relationships. If rules have changed about something, I don't know how long you can store stuff in the refrigerator or where you're supposed to be parking or any of those types of things, even if they're only temporary things, because maybe you're doing some construction. I don't know. Please, please, please do mini onboarding to welcome a person back from their leave. This is also a great time to explore if there are any limitations to them doing the essential functions of their job. So for those of you who are HR friends, you know that what I'm talking about is the Americans with Disabilities Act process. We want to make sure that we're engaging in that interactive process to find out if there are any limitations that we need to accommodate with their return. Do not miss that opportunity in return to work. Okay, no different than when we go through it in return to work from somebody on workers' comp. Okay, really important that we catch those. Okay, intermittent leave really isn't all that different. Okay, the only things that are different here are the things I have bolded on our slide. We are still going to confirm eligibility and designate it in writing, either by looking into the system or actually making those determinations. And we're going to record the start date, the expected end date, and we're going to track the hours. Okay, don't bulk track hours. You're going to see that in a couple bullets here. This is not a they were on FMLA or intermittent FMLA for 9 hours this week. No, no, no. We want that daily iteration, because intermittent is usually defined in the qualifying instance in the practitioner's medical certification about what the limitations are. It may be up to 3 times a month they will be gone 2 hours a day, or up to, once a week they will be gone for 4 hours. You need to be able to track it to the degree that the actual intermittent leave was approved. Okay, so just make sure you're thinking through how that's working as far as timekeeping is concerned. You need to set clear call-in and notice expectations and identify who approves schedule changes. So if this is one of those intermittent ones, like maybe it's migraines, not uncommon for us to see that a person might miss up to 2 days every month as a result of migraines. Well, when are they supposed to call in? As soon as they know. Are you following your regular call-in procedures for somebody who's going to miss a day unexpectedly? What are you doing there? Make sure that that's clear. And if it does deviate from the regular call-in procedures for unplanned absenteeism, why is it different? Okay, make it simple. Make it simple, y'all. Doesn't need to be super hard. Make it simple. Okay, track each absence, late arrivals, early departures against the documentation that said how things were going to happen. And again, don't bulk code. Reconcile weekly, that's the same. log required notices and certifications. Here's the difference though, on intermittent leave, there's likely a recertification checkpoint. So every year you can do recertification. Because they'll expire. Essentially, we're just checking in. That's all this is. We're just checking in to see if the condition or the expectations about need for intermittent leave have changed. That's it. Sometimes you get back the exact same form over again with new initials on it and a new date. Neato. But we need it in the file, and you do it consistently for everyone. Okay, still going to schedule check-ins to make sure that what's on the books is working for the individual. This is just one more way to look at, are there any changes? Do we need to go through the recertification process? And then ultimately, if the condition or situation resolves itself, then we close out with final totals and or potentially a transition into continuous leave, which is not odd. Sometimes we see people start with continuous and then transition to intermittent. The opposite can happen. They start with something intermittent because they think they've got it. The concern or illness continues to a place where they need to be out all of the time for a duration. This frequently happens in support of a parent, maybe an aging parent who, intermittently, yep, I'm going to need to go take care of them. That turns into we're in the final stages of life and they need to spend some consistent and continuous time with them. It transitions into that continuous leave to support them until they're passing. So there's a lot. There's a lot there, but there's a whole lot of similarities. Okay, so make it easy. Try not to make it too difficult here. Resources that you have available to yourself. Again, like I mentioned, the Department of Labor sets and regulates the criteria around the Family and Medical Leave Act. The hyperlink is active in the slides. You can also simply go to, on Google, DOL, which is Department of Labor, FMLA, and it will take you right to the landing page about this. And there's all kinds of great resources, but this isn't new. This has been around for a really long time. So there is a significant amount of history that you can also find on that page. So if you get lost, just give us a simple call and we'll see what we can do to get you headed in the right direction. And then Paid Leave Oregon. I'm giving you two resources here. One is Oregon Employment Department. And if you go Oregon Employment Department, Paid Leave Oregon on a Google search, you will get directly to their landing page for Paid Leave Oregon. Remember that when all of this started, Oregon Employment Department was not only going to be the administrator, they were also the regulator of Paid Leave Oregon. So you'll find a tremendous amount of information there. That is different than Francis Online. There are links on this page to Francis Online. That is where you're going to get information about what your employees are doing, so on and so forth. That does require login access, and it's a process that you have to go through with Oregon Employment Department. If you're a person going, oh my gosh, the person who used to have access is gone, and now I'm the new person, and I can't seem to get access to our account, this is when you're going to call the Paid Leave Oregon team. Yes, you're probably going to have to sit on hold for a little bit and explain your circumstance so that they can help you through the process of gaining access. The last one I'm giving you there is the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. Our friends at BOLI are now the regulators associated with Paid Leave Oregon. That happened not in our current legislative session here in 2026, but back in 2025. So that shift is underway. They also have a Paid Leave Oregon protections page. When you get there, there's actually two tabs, just like they have for almost everything. They have a tab for employers and they have a tab for employees or for workers. Okay, you can look at both of those. They don't hide this information. It's there to help you. This is also where I'm going to strongly encourage that you use their technical assistance line for employers. So if you have questions about this, you reach out to them. You can reach out over the phone. You can reach out via email. And please know, the Bureau of Labor and Industries is a group of educate, educate, educate. They don't want to have to do investigations and sanction people. That's not where they're at, which is why they have a separate division which is the technical assistance and guidance for employers, that is separate and distinct from complaints. Their information does not cross over, but for the purpose of general discussion to help, where do employers need more education? Okay, so they're not looking through what are all the questions that came in so we can go and do an investigation and sanction an employer. Nope, that's not how it works. There's specifically protections in place so that that does not happen. They are all about educate. So please use them. Please use them. They're very, very good about listening to the circumstance and working through all the relative pieces and helping give direction. Of course, HR Answers is available to you at any time. Because we didn't do this session live, and again, I apologize. My illness got the better of me yesterday. So I do apologize that I wasn't able to do this live and field questions. But at any point in time, if we can be assistance at HR Answers, please let us know. There are any number of services that we can help with. Our website is www.hranswers.com. You are always welcome to email us at info, I-N-F-O, at hranswers.com. And then, amazing but true, the telephone still works. 503-885-9815. And you can simply ask to speak with me. Again, I'm Lori Grenia. Let me know that, hey, I listened to that lunch bunch on PLO and FMLA. More than happy to answer any questions that you may have. It's our pleasure. This is what brings us joy, is to help organizations find success in their application of HR practice. So thank you again for your participation today. Don't forget, we have some upcoming lunch bunches. We do these every month. So our next one is Wednesday, April 3rd. This is going to be on the HR role versus the leadership role and where support ends and ownership begins. Then on Wednesday, May 6th, Jean Hansen is going to be our guest speaker talking about caregiving is the topic for that one. And then June 3rd, again, you can just mark it on your calendar. That's to be determined. Deborah Jeffries coordinates our agendas for these. She is still working on that coordination piece. And as soon as we know, we will post it on your website so you will know. And we do appreciate your time. Thanks so much for listening. And I hope you found the information helpful. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thanks so much.